Everyone knows Andre Iguodala, former All-Star, two-time All-NBA defender, three-time champion, and a former Finals MVP. What on earth is going on with him? Currently, he's with the Memphis Grizzlies. Well, that's who he's currently signed with. But he has not played a single game for the Grizzlies in the 2019-20 season so far. That's quite a big change, going from a starter in the NBA Finals to not even playing at all for a rebuilding team. Although there have been a bunch of stuff going on behind the scenes, which I'll talk about in a bit. On the other end of the spectrum, we have Jonathon Simmons. Remember him? Back in 2016-2017, he gained a lot of recognition. He was known as the man who paid $150 to try out for the Spurs G League team, but eventually made his way onto the NBA roster, and then earned himself a 3-year, $20 million contract with the Orlando Magic. However, he finished only 2 years of that contract and then he got waived in this past summer of 2019. As of now, nobody has claimed him off the waiver, so it's looking pretty rough for the guy who shocked everybody just a few years ago. Anyway, how's it going, folks? My name's Andy, and today we're gonna take a look at both of these players and their current situations. Starting with Andre Iguodala, here are the circumstances. Basically, shortly after the 2019 NBA Finals, Kevin Durant announced he would be joining the Brooklyn Nets. And with Klay Thompson projecting to miss most of the 2019-20 season with a torn ACL, the Warriors organization realized that it was going to be a rebuilding year for the team. As a result, they wanted to focus more of their minutes on developing their young players and retooling their roster. This led to Andre Iguodala being the odd man out, which is why they traded him to Memphis. Memphis gave up quite a decent chunk of their cap space to acquire him. They also used their trade exception to absorb Iguodala's massive $17 million salary. Regardless of that, right when the trade happened, it was rumored that the Grizzlies would immediately negotiate a buyout of his contract, so he could join another team, probably the Lakers, who were one of the teams interested in adding Iguodala after a potential buyout. Unfortunately for them, they waited for weeks, and then months, and then as the season started, there was still no sign of Iguodala getting a buyout. The thing is, he made it very clear that he had absolutely no interest in playing for the Grizzlies, as he didn't even show up to training camp and hasn't had any contact with the rest of the roster. He has not been with the team, nor has he ever traveled with the team. By early September, there were reports that the Grizzlies refused to engage in buyout talk with Iguodala, and they wanted Iggy to show up to training camp, even though he never did. This was quite an awkward situation. Everyone expected Memphis to buy him out because Dwight Howard also got traded to Memphis over the summer, but then he got waived. However, the situation with Iguodala is different because his contract is way too much for them to just waive him, compared to Dwight, who was making significantly less money at $5 million that year. In an article by sports columnist Mark Giannotto, he wrote, "He's an attractive piece to an NBA title contender because of his track record of postseason success with Golden State. He's a barrier to younger players getting more minutes in Memphis. So the Grizzlies simply want to extract as much value out of Iguodala as possible, whether that's through a negotiated buyout or a trade." Mark also added on, "The Grizzlies won't give Iguodala a buyout unless he gives back money. Iguodala doesn't seem ready to give back money, and there aren't a lot of teams capable of taking on Iguodala's $17 million salary in a trade at the moment." Basically, Iguodala is stuck in Memphis. He's getting paid to do nothing, and the Grizzlies refuse to give him a buyout because they want to find a trade for him to get something back in return. While other teams are pissed off because they're essentially holding Iguodala hostage, it's a smart move by the Grizzlies front office. This is a guy who was a starter in the NBA Finals just a few months ago, and a lot of contending teams want him. He still has a decent amount of value and a ton of experience. What's even funnier is that Iggy actually predicted his trade to Memphis before the trade even happened. During the summer, he said he was talking to his wife and casually mentioned, "I don't know, I'll probably end up in Memphis or some shit." She says, "For real?" I was like, "Maybe, but probably not, I don't know." The next day, I got the message. It was Memphis. I fell out laughing. From the looks of it, we'll never see Iguodala in a Memphis jersey, but hopefully this situation will get sorted out in the future. I do want to see him on a contender again, but not at the expense of the Grizzlies. Maybe a trade will be the best solution, but like what was mentioned earlier, it's hard to find a trade for a $17 million expiring contract. And now we move on to Jonathon Simmons. While Simmons is in a completely different scenario, it's a great comparison to see how two players in different stages of their careers are struggling to play in the NBA again. Simmons came from nothing and worked his way up from a G League tryout to the NBA ranks. Back in San Antonio, he showed flashes of potential. As a 26-year-old rookie, he was quite old, but he played with a veteran mindset and had experience from playing overseas. In the 2017 playoffs, with Kawhi going down with an injury against the Warriors, Simmons stepped up and performed very well. He only started 4 games in that entire playoff run, but in those 4 games, he averaged around 16 points a game, 46% from the field and 35% from 3. His efforts would earn him a big payday in that summer of 2017, where the Magic gave him a 3-year, $20 million deal. Now, obviously, the Magic were in a much different position compared to the Spurs. They were rebuilding and needed a dynamic offensive scoring threat like Jonathon Simmons. So in his first season in Orlando, he looked pretty solid, averaging about 14 points a game and became one of the main scoring threats on a deep roster. However, his second season there proved to be quite underwhelming, as he was struggling with his shooting. So by the trade deadline, Orlando sent him to the Philadelphia 76ers in exchange for Markelle Fultz. In hindsight, it was a huge steal for the Magic because Simmons ended up barely playing for Philly, while Fultz recovered from his injury and is playing well. Originally, Simmons was supposed to be a good addition for Philly in their upcoming playoff run, but he didn't get many minutes and eventually fell out of the rotation. Afterwards, the Sixers saw their playoff run end in a brutal fashion. Then, over the summer, they realized that keeping Simmons on the roster just wasn't worth it, and decided to trade him to the Washington Wizards for cash considerations. About 2 weeks later in July, the Wizards decided to waive him, mainly to save cap space. While Simmons had $5.7 million remaining on his contract, only $1 million of that was guaranteed. This meant that he became an unrestricted free agent who's free to do whatever he wants, and to sign with whichever team he wants. However, nobody else wants him. Since he got waived, we haven't heard much from him. There haven't been any news about him, and we don't know what he's been up to. Some writers suggested a possible reunion with San Antonio. I mean, that's where his career kicked off, and he still has a great relationship with Coach Pop and the rest of the organization. Others have suggested the Houston Rockets. They've been struggling with some injuries down the bench, and Simmons was born and raised in Houston, so there's a connection there. But this is also just a suggestion, and there's no sign that the Rockets are actually interested. The truth is, after Simmons left the Spurs, nobody really paid attention or cared about him anymore. A lot of his recognition and fame was because everybody praised the Spurs for finding another unknown gem and turning him into a legit NBA player. For decades, the Spurs have been known for doing that, and Simmons was just another player on that long list. After making it through the G League tryouts and onto an NBA roster, his story and upbringing was very inspirational, but I think the expectations stopped there. He was never gonna be a star, he was barely a borderline starter in Orlando, and I can't see him having an important role on another playoff contender. It was just the right mix of circumstances at the right time that caused him to blossom in San Antonio. With that being said, he might be given another chance to play in the NBA in the future. At 30 years old, with some playoff experience under his belt, he still has some time. And even if he never plays another NBA game, at least he still got paid. I'm sure he's happy, and I'm sure he can take care of his family now, and his 4 daughters. Anyway, that's all folks. That sums up the current situations of Andre Iguodala and Jonathon Simmons. 2 players with completely different career paths, but neither of whom are active right now. Let me know your thoughts on these 2 players. Do you see either of them playing a game in the 2019-20 season? In my opinion, I believe Iguodala will be traded before the deadline, so we'll probably see him play, eventually. Although he is 35 years old and maybe he'll just retire, who knows? Anyway, let me know in the comments. Thank you everybody so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, I'll see you next time. Peace.